Now, Treasury and the Public Enterprises Department will be the first to start with zero-based budgeting. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni announced this during his budget speech yesterday. So how will a zero-based budget work, and how will it affect the operations of departments? To help us understand this, I'm joined by Peter Attard Montalto, Head of Capital Markets Research at Intelli-dex. So the Finance Minister reckons zero-based budgeting is a good way to cut state expenses. How will that happen?
Well, there are two forms of zero-based budgeting. I mean, the first one is interdepartmental, where you're looking inside a given department budget vote. You're seeing how best to distribute things. You're working a lot with the department. The department has a lot of control over that process. Those kind of expenditure reviews go on from time to time. Treasury is now trying to step up that process to get departments to think about things from scratch. That's a positive step, but in reality there is not a huge amount of fat through that method to be cut. The big thing that isn't happening fast enough is a much bigger cabinet level mindset change, where you're doing this entire cross-government comparison of, you know, what is our priority? Is our priority to pay a grant? Is it to employ a nurse? Is it to employ someone in the army? These sorts of things. That kind of prioritization and discussion has been very much absent until now, and is only going to happen very, very slowly. Treasury are rolling out this zero-based budgeting process very slowly in the coming years, and we saw that yesterday. This sort of straining at the seams, some top trimming of budgets without necessarily this overriding strategic focus of what is important. And I think that's ultimately what led to the fact that the grants were trimmed yesterday, the increase in grants.
Yeah, so does zero-based budgeting actually put an end to corruption or make it more difficult in any way?
Well, a proper zero-based budgeting would basically have consultants come in, Treasury come in, GTAC, and have a look at things. They would look at where the fat is in the system in terms of wasteful and inappropriate expenditure, in terms of corruption as well. But a lot of the easy stuff there has been cut. What we now see is very tightly bonded rent extraction into programs, which is much, much harder to remove. You know, it's, for instance, these very difficult choices of, can you remove, say, corrupt expenditure from a supply chain to school feeding program? Maybe not. Or do you cut the entire school feeding program? Again, probably not. These are the very difficult, challenging choices which have to be made in this sort of fiscal scenario, and with a lot of austerity and expenditure cuts still required and baked in deep below the surface, hidden below the surface in the budget yesterday.
Yeah, so given that this will be time-consuming, right, and we know that our departments struggle with details, is it actually possible to draw up a budget from scratch every year, or are we going to see delays?
So you need to have a rolling basis of these departmental level ones. They're doing much more focus on National Treasury and DP next year, which seems to miss the fact of some of these bigger departments that maybe need more focus to move the dial on the number of, or the quantum of cuts. But what's lacking so far, I think, is this high-level political discussion at Cabinet. And it's raised from the question yesterday as well of, for instance, how did Cabinet sign off on these real cuts to grants, where they were giving, on the flip side, largely inflation increases to tax brackets? Where is that big high-level discussion going on in Cabinet? It seems to be entirely absent. And that ultimately is a mindset issue. Treasury can try and push that to some degree to have those types of discussions, but ultimately it takes a top-down leadership from the President to engender those discussions through Cabinet.
Yeah, so if you can, take us through the zero-based budgeting being used elsewhere in the world and if it's actually been effective so far.
So it's happened a lot after deep financial crises in Eastern Europe, after the financial crash. It often happens when the IMF comes into to places, or where the World Bank does, say, capacity building operations around fiscal management and things like that. And so it went on after the LATAM crisis, the Asia crisis, to some degree. But in general, I think, you know, it's only so much technical work you can do on this kind of stuff. You need a political decision to have those difficult conversations on prioritization, which is ultimately always a domestic thing. And now, ultimately, in the past, in many of these places where people, for instance, fell out of IMF programs or had challenges sticking to the consolidation path, is normally because, you know, ultimately there can't be agreement within a macro framework on priorities, and that's where ultimately things go wrong.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.